In this video, I'm going to show you how to properly set up your fletching jig to make sure you have the best vein contact or feather contact possible on your arrows. So that way your veins will stay on longer and hopefully you'll shoot better in the long run.
You're watching the Kaminski YouTube channel.
So I've got some arrows that I need to work on fletching up, and I was going to use my Bits and Burger jig here because I'm actually going to be using feathers. And I figured I might as well take the opportunity to show you how to properly set up your fletching jig to make sure you have the best vein contact possible on the shaft itself. So this way it'll stick on the shaft for longer. The actual glue interface will be stronger, so that way the veins last much longer on the arrows themselves and don't go flying off when you shoot them. Ultimately, I'm going to show you how to fletch your arrows the right way to make sure that the veins stay on as long as possible. That way you get the most for your money when it comes to shooting some archery equipment here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on the bench. I'm going to put the camera over the bench back here behind me so that way you'll get an overhead view and see what I'm actually doing and describe to you how I'm working on things, how I'm looking at things, and what I'm specifically looking for to make sure I have the best vein contact possible. Before I do that though, new apparel, as you can see. Thanks to Ryan for a couple of new designs. I'll be debuting them here shortly. They are available right now on Teespring, links in the description below. And I do have a banner across the bottom, or at least I did. I'm having some interface connection issues between Spring and YouTube for whatever reason. I don't know what's going on down there. But anyway, a couple of new different designs. You know, backyard champion here. A great design because, you know, everybody's always a champion in their own right, especially when they're in the comment section below. Tell me about it. Anyway, I'm gonna get you on the bench here and show you what I'm working on and show you how to fletch arrows like you know what you're doing. All right, so we've got our Bits and Burger fletching jig, a few different arrows, some arrows I want to show you how to set some stuff on, and I've got some veins over here off camera. But what I've got here, this is what I already said, a Bits and Burger fletching jig. It's the Bits and Burger Fletch Master, right? Yeah, Dial-A-Fletch Fletch Master. And as you can see, this thing has been well loved and well used. This actually came from a range I grew up in, basically. Leo's Archery Range, that was in East Aurora, New York. If anybody's from there, shout out to them. But anyway, this actually came from the turntable that they used. As you can see, there's two holes here because it was screwed down to a table, a rotating table, so they had a dozen fletching jigs, so they could fletch a dozen arrows really fast. And I bought it, as you can see, with a straight clamp. You know, the patina matches. These two are new clamps, your right and left hand helical clamps. But basically, as you can see, there is some adjustment on this particular fletching jig for the offset, the angle that everything sits at. And so that's important because as you go to do right and left helicals for different spins, for different feathers particularly. I'll have links in the description below and a card at the top up there for a video on whether or not you should use right or left helical feathers and which clamp you should use to fletch those feathers. So I do have that already created, so you can check that out. In a nutshell, left wing, left helical, right wing, right helical. But it doesn't matter right or left-handed, that's up to you as an individual. Personally, I like left hand helical due to many different factors. One of those being that the arrow naturally rotates counterclockwise, so I just enhance that spin by keeping it spinning that direction using the fletching jig that I normally use. But because I want to fletch some feathers, I have to use this jig because that's the only jig that I have that's capable of doing feathers like this. This is actually a flu feather, the big 5 1/4 inch feathers that I've burned down. I'm actually going to create a video on how to do that because I've got some trad arrows here set up, not set up, but in a bag here on site for a particular reason that you'll find out hopefully in the near future. So that's why I'm doing this video, to show you how to set this up because I want to actually fletch those and start using them here in a little bit. So the goal would be to ultimately fletch your arrow to have the vein perfectly touching the shaft the whole time, to be perfectly perpendicular to the shaft where it's touching it, so that way you can take your arrow and be as rough as you want to it and pull on the vein as much as you want in any place, in any position, and the vein will stick and it won't come off. You'll damage the vein long before you'll damage the actual glue holding the vein on the shaft. I can't pull it off. It's stuck on there. I use no primer, No special adhesive, standard vein glue on some aluminum shafts, and I just can't pull that feather, or that vein off rather. It's stuck on there for good. And unfortunately I'm gonna have to refletch this one, but I figured, you know, I wanna show you that you can fletch arrows so well that the vein will tear before it'll come off the shaft. The main thing is what I've already said, is making sure that the vein ends up being perfectly perpendicular to the shaft itself and it's not off any direction at all. Now, there's a reason that you have adjustability here. Obviously, you have right and left hand helicals that would require various different offsets. You can see that I fletched lots of different arrows and I have different indications on this fletching jig for a like cheat sheet on how to make arrows work, or at least get me close, depending on the size of the arrow I'm actually fletching. So you'll see that I have this set up for pretty much left hand helical, because the L is lined up down here and the L is lined up here. The R is not lined up to anything. R and R are far off. Down here it's pretty close, and I'm not setting up spin wings, so that mark is off. So what you want to see is if you were to look from this direction straight down on the shaft, it's very difficult due to the bench shape here. Let me see if I have a broken arrow up here I can grab. Here, I've got a broken arrow that you'll be able to see it better. But essentially, this arrow is worn out, so forgive me. But if you look down the shaft, you'll see that the vein is perfectly perpendicular to the shaft on both the rear section and the front section. You'll see that they are perfectly perpendicular where it is touching. Not necessarily perpendicular here and perpendicular here. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is perpendicular throughout the entire vein contact area. You want the vein to be sticking directly above the arrow, straight off of the arrow, not at an angle and not off to the side of the arrow. The reason being is if you are off at an angle, so if this is the shape of the shaft, like this, and this is the vein, if it is perfectly straight to it, it has full contact like this. If it is off to the side, it has strong contact over here, but no contact over here. And it basically, the vein and even a feather do not just have a straight, you know, base to it. There is a flat piece. On the feather, there's the right and left L's on the feathers. On veins, it's a straight vein with a Y or a T, depending on how it is built. And so if I were to like make a flat spot like this, so if this is a vein and this is the leg of the vein that is supposed to be contacting the shaft, this would be ideal. This is not ideal, as you can see, because it's touching here, but over here it's not touching, so the glue doesn't hold it. And same thing is opposite this way. It touches here, but not over there, and so you don't have full contact. And the glue that we use today, the super glue, it's essentially just a very thick CA glue, cryo, I don't even know. I used to know the actual name of this actual stuff in the chemical, but I don't know. It's CA glue, cryosella something something or other. Comment below if you know what that is. But anyway, it doesn't fill gaps. All of the solvents evaporate, and the vast majority of what is actually in the glue goes away into the ether. And it does not just actually hold and fill gaps. So if you have a gap like this over to this side, that part will never actually be glued to the shaft. You have to have actual contact to bond the vein to the shaft. And that's why I can rip the vein off without the vein coming off, because that vein is bonded to the actual shaft itself, because it has full contact all the way down the vein. Same goes for smaller veins like this, full contact, extreme helical, and for feathers, I have full contact from back here all the way to the front, as best as I possibly can, because bits and burgers are not perfect, especially when you get into these length of feathers. It makes it really challenging to fletch on here properly. But you get the idea of the principle of what I'm trying to say. Good contact versus improper contact, and why veins fall off is because there's not a bond, there's no actual chemical bond between the vein itself and the shaft. And without full contact, you can't have that. So, what I want to show you, I'm going to grab one of these trad arrows, pull it out of the package, beautiful arrows, and I'm going to set it up and do my best to show you what I'm trying to look for, because it's a little challenging on camera here. First, I'll grab a vein and show you how veins are supposed to get done. I'm gonna grab one of the Pro Max AAEs. Actually, I'm gonna grab a white one so you'll see the contrast a little bit better. This jig is already set up for left, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set it up for right helical so you can see it. So I will first clamp the vein into the fletching jig as so, all the way down at the base. I like them all the way back, but that's just me. It's up to you as the individual. And what you want to do is when you push it onto the actual fletching jig itself, you want to look for full contact, as I've been saying. But if you look right down in there, you see how the base of the vein, let me zoom in, see how the base of the vein isn't touching, it's lifting off the shaft. You can actually see under the base. So the one side is touching like I showed you with this whole thing, right? So you see how that's not gonna stick. But back here, you have some contact. It actually is touching excellent. And it's very difficult to see from this angle, because what you wanna see is you actually want to take the arrow and the shaft, and you wanna look at it with your eye back here looking down the shaft so you can see where the vein is touching. Just looking at it from this perspective overhead like this makes it a little challenging to see what you're actually looking for, but when you look from behind the shaft or from in front of the shaft, you'll actually see that contact. So because the Bitzenberger down here, this thing's in the way and you can't see through it, you gotta just do your best to tell if it has full contact. But with the arrow, I can look from this side of the shaft down and see if my feather is touching correctly. This case, it's a vein. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna adjust the angle of the actual clamp itself to get full contact, and then I'll show you what it looks like after the fact. But you can grab these dials and you can turn it, and you'll see that it actually adjusts the angle of the arrow itself. Let me loosen it up all the way, I guess. And that way you'll see how much it can move. So it can be completely off one direction and the other. So you want to do your best to push the clamp down so it is making contact with the shaft as best as possible, sitting in the center right there. And then I hold it up and try to look down the shaft at the rear portion, pull it up a little so it's not fully touching. That's another tip you can do, is you can actually, instead of having it fully down against the shaft, you can lift it up ever so slightly, just a small amount. And you want to slowly slide it down until one part of the vein itself is touching, and then take a look. And if I just barely touch it, let's see if I can get it there, and then I'll show you on camera. Really, really hard to see. But basically, this side towards you is just barely touching. It touches first, but the side away from you isn't quite there. So it shows me that I'm not perfectly centered. If I were to push it all the way down, it would make the whole vein base touch. And you can get away with that when you're shooting veins that have such a huge base on them. Look how big that base is compared to the vein itself. Very, very large. Now compare that, same shape of vein. This is a prototype I've been working on, and I'll be releasing here eventually, selling under my own brand, so stay tuned. But compare the differences in the vein base size between these two. You see that white one's huge, and that brown one is basically non-existent. It's honestly not much wider than this full vein here itself. The base is just minuscule. So it's so much more important when shooting this style of vein, the wave vein, that's what that is, super narrow base like it is there, makes it really difficult to make the arrow or the vein stick on the arrow correctly. But you go to big, giant bases like that are common on more standard style fletchings, they're much easier to stick. You can get away with a lot more when just one side's touching and you push the clamp down and it flexes the vein and makes the whole base touch. You get away with it on these style of veins, the big type of veins. But the small veins with the small bases, specifically the waves, you gotta be perfect in your setting to make sure the whole thing is touching as it initially comes down, as opposed to touching this way and then flexing down. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so let's finish dialing this one in. All right, now I got that touching perfectly back in the back side. Now reconfirm in the front side. And it is perfect in the front now. But there's a big problem I'm running into. And this is something that you need to pay attention to when using your fletching jigs. Even something that's common, popular, and widely used is not perfect. This jig isn't perfect. It's a great jig, don't get me wrong, but it's not perfect. And the reason is, right now, I'm touching the base of the vane back here with the clamp all the way down. You'll see the tip of the clamp up here is actually touching the shaft, but the vane is not making contact with the actual arrow down here. So you can't possibly expect that vane to stay on long term. Two ways to fix this is, number one, we need a new clamp, because the way that these are designed, they're not perfect. They're not straight across like this. They're actually curved slightly like that. So this point and this point touches before this point does. It's a flaw in the design. It is what it is. And basically, you need to make sure that you have full contact. So the way that you trick this without cutting the clamp or adjusting and shaving this down is you just pull the tip away like that. See how I have the vane kind of protruding a little bit out this way? Maybe not that much. I'd probably do it about that much right there. See how it's sticking out slightly further here than it is here? Put it on, slide it down so it touches like that. You got the base already touching in the back, and bam. Full contact now from front to back, perfectly perpendicular to the shaft the entire way. And now that vane, when I glue it on, will not come off of this shaft. But because I'm not putting vanes on this arrow, we're gonna get rid of that, and I'm gonna pull out a feather. I think I have probably equal amounts right and left wing here. I'll probably do left wing because I think I have a little bit more left wing. I like left wing anyway. Plus this jig's now set up for a right wing, so we might as well do it for left. So we'll get this out of the way. Yes, you can use a straight clamp. I haven't really talked about that. Same type of principle. You can see how it's not set up correctly. It's off to the side of the shaft. It won't work. I don't like doing offsets with straight clamps, not on vanes, because if this is the shaft and this is the vane, straight, you have great contact. As I start angling it, the front of the vane and the back of the vane start falling off of the shaft itself. You can get away with a little bit, but only when you have a wide base that can pivot and actually make full contact. Otherwise, it'll just fall off as usual. So I never really liked straight clamps. It's a good beginner setup to use straight vanes. It's totally fine. But this is a left wing feather. This is a flu feather, I guess. It was what it would be considered. It's an uncut wing section. I have a left clamp for this left wing. And the way you can tell really quick is if you look from behind the vane, behind the feather, and if it makes an L with the leg that sticks off, that's left wing. So I'm going to clamp this in the jig here. As you can tell, the vane is massive and takes up most of the clamp. But if you remember correctly, what I said, and I'm gonna get ahead of myself here, but it's important. Remember I said the clamp touched here and here, but it didn't touch in the middle. So I'll take the feather and I actually pull it out a little bit in the center like this. Not a ton, but just a little bit, and you'll see it doesn't even have to be perfect. The feather is protruding away from the clamp in the center, so that way when I put it on the shaft, it will basically do this and squish down and sit flat against the shaft, and then I'll have full pressure contact against the shaft itself, and then it'll stick for as long as I want it to stick instead of it falling off when it wants to. So I'm gonna pull that back out a little bit, just so that way when I'm putting it on and off, it does make full perfect contact. I'm going to put the clamp on, and again, I just set it up for right wing. Now this is left wing, so you'll see it's touching back here somewhat, but off the front, it's completely off the shaft, not even remotely close. Get things closer by adjusting the dials. Snug this down so it doesn't move a ton. I'm not looking at my marks that I have marked on my jig here for a cheat sheet. I'm trying to do this best in the honest way. And again, what I'm doing is my eye is over here and I'm looking down this direction to try to get a perspective from the front of the shaft to see where that feather touches the shaft first, and see if the flat part of the base of the vane is touching the shaft I'm kind of looking from, let's see, like this kind of perspective. So I'm kind of looking down this way, and I'm trying to make that have full contact there where it touches the flat spot of the vein, the flat spot of that feather, touches, you know, that round part of the shaft first, like that. See that? So that's the perspective I'm using from this angle. It's kind of like literally just past this ear and watching that down there. If it was with a right wing, it would be plainly visible in between the V-block assembly. But that's touching perfect in the front, and in the back, it's too far off. And now I do the same thing, but I'm kind of looking from this angle, and I'm just picking the shaft up, or I'm picking the feather up and off the shaft and setting it back down on it to make sure that the center of that flat spot of the feather is touching the center of the shaft first. And now I have full contact. Because of the way the feathers are, you have the quill, or not the quill would be this part, I guess. The feather comes down, attaches to the quill, and the quill has a leg on this left wing off to the left. It looks like the letter L, capital letter L. And so the feather is not in the center of the vein, but that flat spot, the center of that flat spot is what's touching the center of the shaft. Again, if this is the shaft, it's touching like this, not like this or like this, and it's not like this either. It's dead in the center and flat, perfectly perpendicular to the shaft itself. And now that it's adjusted and set in place, if I check my cheat sheet that I have down here, it's pretty close. It's slightly off. Both of the clamp settings are slightly this direction compared to the actual marks, probably because I had this jig set up for a different sized diameter shaft, possibly an X10, and possibly with waves. That's going to be my guess. It could have been with some big arrows like this, 2312s or these 2712s, and set them in there and use the adjuster to make it work for that. I'm not entirely sure what mark I had this for each, for which size shaft, and each different shaft size does require different offsets slightly. So don't assume anything, always check it. Make sure you have your perpendicular contact like this, not offset either direction, and your veins and feathers will stick much, much longer, and you'll be a happier archer in the long run and probably save some more money in your pocket, or at least have some more money to spend on some more gear to play with different things, because let's be honest, archery is somewhat addicting when it comes to equipment, and you always want to buy something else. So you're welcome. Anyway, reminder, check out links in the description below on ways you can support this channel. Also, check out the new apparel, and a lot of the different things that I've talked about here, I will have links in the description below for you to check out in case you're interested in seeing some of this equipment I've used.